Let's talk about the unbelievable Anne Hutchinson, 1591 to 1647. She makes a emblematic and excellent contrast to Jonathan Edwards. On the other hand, we're going back 100 years, all right, which might appear indefensible in a certain way in teaching a course like this, or just backwards. Uh, but I think that first of all, the kind of heretics or free will type people and that Edwards was fighting against, so-called heretics, um, are well represented by Hutchinson. And also, I think that Hutchinson's kind of theology, the way she thought about her religion, uh, ends up being, first of all, some version of it ends up, maybe milder versions of it in a way, end up destroying Edwards' Calvinism and also setting the tone for a lot of both the radical and the mainstream thought in America throughout the 19th century, throughout the 1800s. In other words, what I'm saying is that Anne Hutchinson's tendency kind of won in a way, even though she's too radical to win. But she's, she's a fundamental, she gives a fundamental, very early expression of American individualism of the kind you see arising really in quite extreme forms in figures like Emerson and Thoreau. All right. Also, the kind of anti-authoritarianism, even anti-statism that you get in a lot of American radical thought, like William Lloyd Garrison's radical abolitionism, for instance, very much takes up the same kind of, religious standpoint, but also political standpoint in terms of, a particularly extreme version of a doctrine of individual rights, which Garrison uses to argue against slavery, as many did. Anne Hutchinson's theology is related to the theology of the Quakers, who were also heretics according to the authorities, the Puritan authorities of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, also exiled, punished, imprisoned, and so on. In a way, this becomes sort of the emblematic radical Protestantism of the colonial period, extending into basic American political thought, and other dimensions of American thought throughout the 19th century. Maybe we can still hear echoes today, although, I'm not sure Americans are still individualists of this variety. Right? I guess I hear a lot more criticism of that from maybe like sort of a socialist standpoint, like what about the collective standpoint? Well, that kind of standpoint, or the re-collectivization, occurs basically under the auspices of kind of an infusion of European leftism at the end of the 19th century, influenced by Marx and so on. So the political situation is very much transformed by 1900. Okay, anyway, Anne Hutchinson. She's this is often known as the antinomian controversy. I'm giving you, I've got one visual aid here. Antinomianism. Yeah, against the lawism. It's the name of a Christian heresy. And so, what the hell, man? Don't answer my questions, doink. Did I say something that sounded like? Oh, never mind. All right. It's the name of a Christian heresy for which people could be convicted, and basically what it indicates is that a position where people claim to be relieved of any obligation to obey the human law, okay, even moral law, but definitely, and maybe this was the practical essence of the thing, civil law, political law, the law of the state. So the idea is that each person, and this is, a basic Reformation teaching, each person has their own relationship to God. Now let's take that to a logical or more extreme conclusion. Only I am in charge of my relation to God. And God's authority makes your puny human authority look irrelevant or evil, actually. God's authority in my relationship with God is expressed in my conscience. And this can be pretty easily secularized. I answer only to my conscience. Right. I think we'll see John Woolman say something like that. We'll certainly see Henry David Thoreau say something like that. I'm going to quote him in a minute. Okay, so anyway, Anne Hutchinson was the daughter of a sort of a dissenting Puritan minister in England. They had all kinds of political and theological problems with churches and the state in England. She emigrated with her husband. She was already in her 30s. She was educated by her father, more widely than most girls of her period, for whatever reason. Quite beautifully educated, I think, probably, certainly in terms of Christian theology. All right, so they end up in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, like a lot of dissenting people who dissented from the Church of England. Although the Hutchinsons also tended to dissent from the people who dissented from the Church of England. They were Puritans dissenting from the Puritans, even in England. Anne Hutchinson eventually had 15 children, okay? And she was a midwife. And she was the wife of an eminent merchant, right? She had some resources and stuff like this, despite their questionable theology for the authorities of the time. So she was, maybe her, what we might think of as her ministry, emerged from her midwifery. She started talking to women spiritually as she assisted in their births, apparently. Pretty soon she was hosting weekly meetings in her house. There's some dispute over who was attending because it really seemed to matter to the Puritan theocracy whether there were any men in attendance. Right? I mean, so like I would say, as I just said, I guess I think she was acting as a minister, and that was her crime because it was illegal for women to preach. They certainly couldn't have an official position as a minister in the church. But they also couldn't function informally as ministers, like as religious teachers. Maybe to a limited extent in a private setting with women, but no sense of public preaching or something like that. And she was at least in between those two things. And she was also highly critical of a number of the eminent ministers of the time. She accused them of teaching a doctrine of works rather than a doctrine of grace. I don't really want to get into that controversy, although we've edged into it in Edwards. Actually, Hutchinson and Edwards would agree on this, the doctrine of grace, the covenant of grace, that we can't be redeemed by our own efforts. That's pretty interesting that she does agree with that, or starts accusing even the basic Puritan ministers of teaching that we can be redeemed by our own works. All right, at any rate, they put her on trial. And for heresy, basically. And the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, John Winthrop, served as judge. John Winthrop is a very famous American figure. I guess most known for the phrase "shining city on the hill" that Reagan, among others, has revived in later centuries. The image of, America, Massachusetts, or whatever as a shining city on a hill. So, I mean, let's look at the selection a little bit. So Winthrop addresses her at the beginning, Mrs. Hutchinson, you are called here as one of those that have troubled the peace of the Commonwealth and the churches here. You are known to be a woman that hath had a great share in promoting and divulging, in the promoting and divulging of those opinions that are causes of this trouble, like division within our beautifully united theocracy. And you have spoken diverse things, as we have been informed, very prejudicial to the honor of the churches and the ministers. And you have maintained a meeting, essentially a church service, an assembly in your house that hath been condemned by the General Assembly as a thing not tolerable, nor comely in the sight of God, nor fitting for your sex. And notwithstanding, that was cried down, you have continued the same. And therefore we have thought good to send for you to understand how things are, that if you be in an erroneous way, we may reduce you, that so you may become a profitable member here among us. Otherwise, if you be obstinate in your course, then the court may take such course with you that you may trouble us no further. Not fitting for your sex is probably pretty key in there. But she's definitely teaching some, antinomian style, government of God heresy as well, I suppose. Okay. So why are you on one side or rather than the other, says Winthrop, in this theological debate, covenant of grace, covenant of works, however you want to frame this? Her first response is, that's a matter of conscience, sir. All right? I believe what I believe. You're not in charge of that. I am. It's a matter of my conscience. I'd be violating myself if I, claimed to believe otherwise than I do. Okay. Let's try to get this together. At one point, Winthrop says, for example, he's just uncomfortable even having this wrangle, actually having an argument in court with this woman who is really quite defiant from the get-go. Even if she seems a little compliant, like she's saying, like, no, I recognize that, I want to hear what you're saying and stuff like that. But she's actually very vocal and more defiant until at the end of the trial, she just blows up, okay? Like, she just, says, I'm not having this at all. A little bit of Hester Prynne in the Scarlet Letter, by the way. Okay. We do not mean to discourse with those of your sex, says Winthrop. We don't wrangle with women here. All right? But he does, because he definitely regards her as a threat. And Winthrop said, in one journal entry, he described her as a woman of ready and bold spirit. And in another journal entry, Winthrop described her as a heretic and an instrument of the devil. Like, he sort of admired her, or at least knew that she was a formidable presence and an intellect and a compelling teacher of the gospel or whatever. But he ends up with the most extreme views of her religious teachings. Okay, just cutting to the chase here. All right. I'll let you look at the unfolding trial. I can't quite do justice to every bit of it. It's a little hard to read because it's in 17th century English with modernized spelling. Okay. Finally, they try to corner her, like, didn't you teach, like, on this occasion, didn't you say this about this minister, and so on. She has various defenses. But she finally gets to this. Now, if you do condemn me, this is on page 5 of our little printout. Now, if you do condemn me for speaking what in my conscience I know to be truth, I must commit myself to the Lord. I must commit myself unto the Lord. Okay, so if you're telling me that I have to, that you're condemning me for speaking my conscience, then I appeal only to the Lord, okay? I don't appeal to you at all. And one of the prosecutors here asked her, how do you know that that was the Spirit, that it was God that informed you, that your conscience speaks true? Why do you trust your conscience? And Hutchinson answers, how did Abraham know that it was God that bid him offer his son, being a breach of the 6th commandment, thou shalt not kill? How did Abraham know that God was speaking to him when he told him to kill his son Isaac? The answer of the deputy governor, she's questioning him now, is by an immediate voice. Abraham heard the voice of God directly. This is a hell of a claim by Hutchinson. So to me, by an immediate revelation, God speaks to me, like he spoke to Abraham. And I do think this is a democratic spirit, though. I think she thinks God speaks to each of us if we will but listen. And the form that he takes for us is our conscience. The deputy governor, how? By an immediate revelation. You hearing God here? And then her response is, by the voice of his own Spirit to my soul. And then she finally, tears it. You have power over my body, you political authorities. But the Lord Jesus Christ has power over my body and soul. And assure yourselves thus much, you do as much as in you lies to put the Lord Jesus Christ from you. You're violating all the spirit of the New Testament, among other things, okay? And if you go on in this course, you will bring a curse upon you and your posterity. And she goes on to say, this whole place is going to, God will judge this Massachusetts Bay Colony if you force me and people like me to violate our own consciences. Well, it's a hell of a story after that, even, too. They exile her. She ends up in Rhode Island with her fellow, quote-unquote, antinomian Roger Williams. She and her family found the city of Portsmouth, Rhode Island, and they institute a constitution with a strict separation of church and state. Okay? Just the opposite of a Massachusetts Bay Colony. And a very early version of stuff that would be enshrined in the Constitution. The secular authorities have no scope to tell you what to believe about God. Right? That's you and your conscience. Now, that's the origin of American individualism. That's where it comes from. It's a theistic notion to begin with, but it gets secularized rapidly. In the founders, okay, and just to finish, they end up leaving to settle in New Netherlands, in what is the Bronx now. And the whole family gets massacred by Indians who are not pleased that settlers have come to the Bronx. Right? So that in 1747. So that's a hell of a tale, and makes this whole thing kind of ambiguous in a way. Like who's a liberatory figure and who's an oppressor. But at any rate, okay, this totally theistic radical Protestant idea that is so in the Quakers, for instance, who founded Pennsylvania, that I answer only to God and only as an individual. and among other things, that frees me to ignore your political system. Right? That kind of stuff. That's a more radical edge. Uh, I mean, that's pretty fundamental to the religious scene in America. It's a lot of dissenting Protestants from England and Europe, right? I mean, the Anabaptists, like the Amish, they're pretty antinomian too, man. Actually, believe it or not. All right. Um, it gets secularized. So, there is an appeal to God, say, in the U.S. Constitution, but, it doesn't all lean on a particular theology, even if it leans on a concept of God-given rights or something like that. But that enshrines a sort of a mild version of this Protestant individualism as the basis of a political system. Same with the separation of church and state. And then, like I say, all these radical figures that really some of the most admirable American thinkers, I think, I guess I would, Lucretia Mott, William Lloyd Garrison, I could name 30 others, but that wouldn't be useful, take up this position exactly, right? And, it's real compelling as an attack on slavery, especially early on, because slavery is enshrined in law and in the Constitution. And so William Lloyd Garrison is like, well, all right, well, I don't recognize the authority of your frigging law and Constitution. And if you're telling me that I have to participate in any way in slavery under force of law, okay, or I have to be taxed by a government that enforces slavery by law, all right, or Fugitive Slave Act and stuff like this, I'm telling you, I'm not under your authority. Right? I'm under only God's authority. Now, by the time you get to Thoreau, it has a completely secular expression. And I just wanted to give you a quick quote from Thoreau's famous essay, Civil Disobedience, which we will be reading. But I thought I'd give you a little a little preview. This could be Anne Hutchinson, except he doesn't really have God behind here, man. Or it's not clear that he does, or he doesn't have Hutchinson's immediate God that's speaking to her in her mind, or whatever. This is a quote from Civil Disobedience. Must the citizen ever, for a moment, or in the least degree, resign his conscience to the legislator? Why has every man a conscience then? I think that we should be men first, and I don't think this is as gendered as it sounds, but you could have criticism along these lines. I think that we should be men first and subjects afterward. It is not desirable to cultivate a respect for the law so much as for the right. The only obligation, and this could have been spoken by Hutchinson, the only obligation which I have a right to assume is to do at any time what I think right. That's American, pretty damn radical individualism from Anne Hutchinson and Henry David Thoreau. Later on.